A humble elderly woman arrives at the luxury hotel for her grandson's wedding and is humiliated in front of everyone. What no one knew was that she was the mother of the chain's owner, and her reaction would shake his empire. The scandal explodes, revealing a system of exclusion that had long been hidden. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The Saturday sun shone intensely over the city of London, reflecting off the mirrored windows of the skyscrapers that cut across the sky. It was a special day, one of those that leave a mark on memory, not just for the planned celebrations, but for what destiny holds when least expected. Mrs. Eleanor woke early that morning, as she always did, even at 78 years old. Her still nimble fingers prepared the coffee, that comforting scent, while her heart beat with a joy mixed with a hint of anxiety. Today was the wedding of Matthew, her beloved grandson, the boy she had cradled in her arms, who grew up listening to her stories, who became a brilliant lawyer, a defender of the rights of those who had no voice. Matthew had always been special, ever since he was a child. He had that way of looking people in the eye, of truly listening, of caring. Mrs. Eleanor smiled as she remembered how he used to sit at her feet in the kitchen of their simple house in Brixton, absorbing every word she said about respect, dignity, and kindness. The ceremony was to be held at the Royal Grand, a 5-star hotel in the Mayfair area, imposing and luxurious, the kind she only saw from afar when she had to pass by on the avenue. Her daughter, Martha, had insisted that she stay there the night before the wedding. It was more practical, they said. That way she wouldn't have to worry about traffic or the fatigue of the journey. Mrs. Eleanor initially hesitated. Luxury hotels were not her world. She felt more comfortable in her simple little house, with her plants in the backyard, her familiar neighbors, her peaceful routines. But Matthew had insisted, with that smile that melted her heart. "Gran, you are the most important person to me. I want you to be there, rested, happy, enjoying every moment, please." And how could she refuse? Her grandson deserved the best of everything, and if being at that hotel was important to him, then she would go, with dignity, with the same composure she had always had, even when life wasn't easy. Mrs. Eleanor carefully chose her outfit, a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, which she herself had sewn years ago and which still fit her perfectly. Her black, low-heeled shoes, comfortable for her long walks. No flashy jewelry, just the rosary she had received from her mother, and the wedding ring she had never taken off her finger, even after so many years. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her white hair was neatly combed. Her face, marked by the wrinkles of time, still held that serene beauty of someone who had lived with purpose and love. At 2 in the afternoon, the taxi Martha had called honked at the door. Mrs. Eleanor picked up her small suitcase, locked the house, and set off towards the other side of the city. As the car crossed London, she watched the landscape transform through the window. The simple houses of her neighborhood gave way to wide avenues, skyscrapers, designer shops. It was like entering another world, a world she knew, but of which she had never been a part. The driver, a middle-aged gentleman named Joseph, was kind throughout the journey. They talked about the traffic, the heat, the wedding. Mrs. Eleanor spoke proudly of her grandson, and Joseph listened with genuine interest. Upon arriving in front of the Royal Grand, he got out to help her with her suitcase, wishing her a wonderful day. She thanked him with a warm smile, paid the fare, and gave a generous tip, despite her modest savings. The hotel was even more impressive up close, the imposing facade all in light marble, with golden details that shone under the sun. 2 enormous glass doors opened automatically, as if inviting guests into a world of luxury and sophistication. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and entered. The lobby was spectacular. The marble floor shone like a mirror, reflecting the immense crystal chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling. There were white leather sofas, gigantic floral arrangements, a water fountain in the center, and in the background, the reception desk, long and imposing, with 4 uniformed attendants. But something in the air changed as soon as Mrs. Eleanor crossed those doors. She felt it. the stairs. They weren't welcoming stairs. They were stares of surprise, of strangeness, of suspicion. An elegantly dressed lady waiting near the sofas quickly averted her eyes. A young couple whispered something to each other as she passed. The doorman who had opened the door maintained a neutral expression, but his body turned slightly as if on alert. Mrs. Eleanor knew those stairs well. She had lived 78 years, raised 3 children. Practically alone after her husband left, worked as a domestic helper in wealthy families' homes. She knew when she wasn't welcome. She knew when her presence bothered people. But she had learned throughout her life to hold her head high, maintain her dignity and move forward. She wasn't going to let prejudiced stares ruin the joy of her grandson's wedding. She walked with firm steps to the reception, pulling her wheeled suitcase. There was a small queue, only 2 people in front of her. She waited patiently, observing the environment. Everything was too perfect, too clean, too cold. There was no human warmth there, only a calculated and distant efficiency. When it was her turn, she approached the counter with a gentle smile. The receptionist was an impeccably dressed young man, slicked back hair, a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a small golden name tag with the name Richard. He looked at her from head to toe, and Mrs. Eleanor noticed the judgment in his eyes. She said nothing, just kept her smile. "Good afternoon," she said with her soft but firm voice. "I have a reservation under the name Eleanor Mary Smith." The receptionist didn't even respond to the greeting. His fingers began typing on the computer, his face taking on an expression of growing impatience. He spent a few seconds looking at the screen, frowning. "I'm not finding any reservation with that name," he said dryly, without looking at her. Mrs. Eleanor remained calm. "It's for today, Saturday. My daughter made the reservation 2 weeks ago. My grandson's wedding is tomorrow here at the hotel." "What's your grandson's name?" he asked with a tone that made his disbelief clear. "Matthew Henry Green. The ceremony will be in the main ballroom." The receptionist typed again, this time finding something. His expression, however, did not improve. On the contrary, his lips tightened into a thin line. "Yes, there's an event tomorrow with that name, but I don't see any accommodation reservation linked to it. Are you sure someone made this reservation?" His voice carried a clear insinuation. Mrs. Eleanor felt a tightening in her chest, but took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm sure. My daughter, Martha Green, made the reservation. She's Paul's sister." Upon mentioning the name Paul, something quickly passed through the receptionist's eyes, but he maintained the same posture. "Madam, I need you to show me proof of the reservation. Otherwise, I cannot check you in." Mrs. Eleanor opened her bag. It wasn't one of those designer bags she saw on the other women in the hotel. It was a simple fabric bag she had made herself. She searched among her belongings for the paper Martha had given her. Her hands, marked by time and work, trembled slightly as she found the document. She handed it to the receptionist. He took the paper with evident disdain, glanced at it quickly, and returned it. "This proof is not valid. It doesn't have the correct confirmation number." "But the reservation number is here," Mrs. Eleanor insisted, pointing to the paper. "My daughter assured me everything was in order." "Madam," the receptionist raised his voice, drawing the attention of other people in the lobby. "This is not valid proof. I cannot accept it. And frankly," he leaned slightly over the counter, "you need to understand that this is a 5-star hotel. We have standards. We cannot simply accept any document that appears here." Mrs. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Any document. The insinuation was clear. He was practically saying she had forged the proof, that she was an imposter. People around began to stop and watch the scene. The whispers increased. "I am not trying to deceive anyone," she said, her voice still calm but now with a tremor. "My daughter made this reservation. I only came for my grandson's wedding. Please, can you check again?" The receptionist made an impatient gesture. "Madam, I have already checked. There is no reservation. And honestly, even if there were, we would need a credit card for guarantee. Do you have a credit card?" He knew the answer. He was asking that question just to humiliate her. Mrs. Eleanor felt tears threaten to surface, but she held them back. She wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. She wasn't going to cry there in front of all those strangers who looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. "I have cash," she said with dignity. "I can pay in cash." The receptionist let out a short, dry laugh. "Madam, this hotel does not accept cash payments, only cards." This was not true, and Mrs. Eleanor knew it. But what could she do? Argue? Make a scene? No, it wasn't her way. She had lived her entire life with dignity, even in the most difficult situations, and she wasn't going to lose that now. At that moment, a woman approached. It was the manager, identified by her name tag that read, Victoria Miller, Accommodation Manager. She was a woman in her 40s, blonde hair tied in a perfect bun, impeccable makeup, a grey pantsuit that screamed sophistication. "What's the problem here?" she asked in an authoritative voice, looking alternately at the receptionist and Mrs. Eleanor. Richard quickly explained, completely distorting the situation. "This lady is trying to check in with proof that is not valid. I have already explained that we cannot find any reservation in her name and that we need a credit card. She insists on staying here." Victoria looked at Mrs. Eleanor with that same judgmental stare. It was a look that said a lot without needing words, a look that classified, that excluded, that diminished. "Madam," she said with false courtesy, "I understand that the situation is frustrating, but we need to follow our protocols. This hotel has very strict security rules. We cannot accept documents that are not officially confirmed by our system." "But I have the reservation," Mrs. Eleanor insisted, her voice now weaker. "My daughter made it. She confirmed everything." Victoria gave a cold smile. "Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. I suggest you contact your daughter and resolve this matter. In the meantime, I need to ask you to leave the counter free for other guests." Mrs. Eleanor felt the ground give way beneath her feet. She wasn't just being prevented from checking in, she was being expelled, there, in front of everyone, as if she were a criminal, an undesirable person. "But my grandson is getting married tomorrow." Her voice broke for the first time. "I need to stay here. I have nowhere to go." The manager maintained her impassive expression. "I'm sorry, but I cannot help you, sir." She gestured to the security guard who was already approaching. "Please escort the lady to the exit." The security guard, a large man in a dark uniform, came closer. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him and saw that, unlike the others, there was embarrassment in his eyes. He didn't want to do it, but he had to obey orders. "Come, madam," he said softly, with a kindness that contrasted with the coldness of the others. "I'll help you with your suitcase." Mrs. Eleanor nodded, speechless. Her hands trembled as she picked up her bag. The security guard took her suitcase and began to walk towards the exit. She followed him, her head still held high, but her heart broken. The stares around were like knives, some of pity, others of satisfaction, still others of indifference. No one intervened, no one said anything, no one defended her. Upon reaching the door, the security guard handed her the suitcase. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he murmured so low that only she heard. "I don't agree with this. You didn't deserve it." She gave him a sad smile. "Thank you, my son. You're a good man." And then Mrs. Eleanor was outside the Royal Grand under the warm London sun, alone, humiliated, not knowing what to do. She sat on a bench on the sidewalk next to her suitcase, and for the first time allowed the tears to flow. They were not tears of anger. They were tears of pain. The pain of a lifetime of being treated as inferior, as invisible, as disposable. She had taught her children that all people deserved respect, that dignity was not measured by the money in one's pocket or the clothes they wore, but by character, by kindness, by integrity. She was sure that Paul, her son, had learned these lessons. He had been such a good boy, so dedicated. He had left Brixton with nothing but determination and the love she had given him. He had built an empire, become successful. But now, sitting on that bench, Mrs. Eleanor wondered if, at some point on that journey, Paul had forgotten where he came from. If he had forgotten the nights she came home exhausted from work, the times they struggled, the stories she told about respect and dignity. Did he know what happened in the hotels he bought and renovated? Did he know how people like her, simple, hard-working people, were treated? With trembling hands, Mrs. Eleanor took her old cell phone from her bag. She needed to call Martha. She needed help. But even before she could dial, the phone rang. It was her daughter. "Mum," Martha's voice was cheerful. "Did you get to the hotel okay? Is everything all right?" Mrs. Eleanor couldn't hold back. The words came out broken between sobs. "Martha, they wouldn't let me in. They said the reservation wasn't valid. They threw me out, darling. They escorted me, out as if I were a criminal." On the other end of the line, there was a heavy silence. Then Martha's voice exploded in indignation. "What? What do you mean they threw you out? Mum, I made that reservation weeks ago. Everything is paid for. I have the proof. How dare they do that?" Mrs. Eleanor tried to calm her daughter. "Martha, don't worry. I can go home. It's no problem." "No, Mum." Martha's voice was firm now, with a determination Mrs. Eleanor recognized. "You are not going home. This is absurd. I'm calling Paul right now. He needs to know what's happening at his hotel." His hotel. The words echoed in Mrs. Eleanor's mind. The Royal Grand belonged to her son. She hadn't known. Paul had several hotels. She lost count. But she never imagined that precisely that one, where her grandson would marry, where she was humiliated and expelled, was owned by her own son. The irony of the situation was so cruel, it almost drew a bitter laugh from her. "Martha," she said softly, "I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to ruin Matthew's wedding." "Mum," Martha's voice was filled with emotion, "you are not causing any trouble. The problem was caused by this hotel. And Paul will know about it right now. Stay there. Don't leave. I'm going to sort this out." The call ended. Mrs. Eleanor put away her phone, wiped her tears, and looked at the imposing building in front of her. Something inside her knew that what had happened that afternoon wouldn't end there, that this moment of humiliation would be the trigger for something much bigger. She thought of all the people who, like her, had probably been treated with disrespect in that place. She thought of the employees who worked there, who perhaps suffered discrimination daily. She thought of her son Paul, and how he would react upon learning that his own mother had been expelled from a hotel he owned. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. The busy streets of London continued their frantic pace, indifferent to the personal drama of a 78-year-old woman sitting on a bench. But Mrs. Eleanor, with all her wisdom accumulated over decades, knew that that moment marked a turning point. Not just for her, but for everyone involved in that story. She closed her eyes and prayed, not a prayer of vengeance, but a prayer of transformation, that from that moment of pain something good could emerge, that her son could see what she had always tried to teach, that the dignity of every human being be respected, regardless of their origin, their color, their clothes, or their bank account. And as she prayed there on that bench, under the changing sky, Mrs. Eleanor did not yet know, but she was planting the seed of a transformation that would change not only her life but the lives of many other people. The Royal Grand, a symbol of luxury and exclusion, was about to face its greatest challenge. And it all began with the humiliation of a woman who, despite everything, never lost her dignity. Paul Green was in his office on the 32nd floor of a commercial building in Canary Wharf when the phone rang. It was late Saturday afternoon, and he was reviewing the numbers for the last quarter. The hotels of the Green hospitality chain had shown record growth, 23 units spread across the UK, all operating with over 80% occupancy. On paper, everything was perfect. The empire he had, built from scratch since that first small hotel in Croydon 15 years ago, was now a benchmark in the sector. He looked at the phone vibrating on the desk. It was Martha. His sister rarely called on weekends. He answered with a smile. "Little sister, what's up? Is everything ready for Matthew's wedding tomorrow?" The answer he received was not what he expected. Martha's voice was filled with a fury he hadn't heard in years. "Paul, you need to explain to me what's happening at the Royal Grand. Now." His smile vanished. "Martha, calm down. What is it? Any problem? With the decoration? With the catering?" "Problem." Her voice went up an octave. "Problem, Paul, is our mother being thrown out of your hotel as if she were a criminal. Problem is her being humiliated in front of everyone, accused of presenting false documents, treated like an imposter. That's a problem, Paul." Paul's world stopped. For a moment, he couldn't process the words. His mind tried to make sense of that sentence. Expelled, humiliated, mother. What are you talking about? Martha took a deep breath, trying to control her own emotion. I made a reservation for Mum to stay at the Royal Grand today so she could be rested for the wedding tomorrow. When she got there, the staff said there was no reservation. They accused her of trying to scam them. They called security and kicked her out. Our mother, Paul, Mrs. Eleanor, the woman who practically raised us alone, who worked her whole life to give us dignity, was treated like trash in your hotel. The words hit Paul like punches. He stood up from his chair, his legs shaky. Where is she now? Sitting on a bench on the sidewalk in front of the hotel, crying at 78 years old, Paul, can you imagine? The humiliation she went through? Paul was already grabbing his car keys. I'm going there now, and I'm going to find out who did this. You're going to do more than find out, Paul. Martha's voice was cold now. You're going to fix this, because if you don't, I swear I'll make public what happened. The entire press will know that Green Hospitality throws out elderly people. I'll destroy the reputation of this hotel and your entire company if I have to. Martha, please, I'll sort it out, believe me. He hung up and ran to the elevator. His hands were trembling. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How had this happened? How had the staff of his hotel treated his mother that way? And more importantly, how could he, who was so proud of having built that empire, not know what was happening within it? During the 20-minute drive to Mayfair, Paul relived memories he had long tried to avoid. He remembered his childhood in Brixton, in the small house where they lived. He remembered his father leaving when he was only 9, leaving his mother with 3 children to raise. He remembered the early mornings when Mrs. Eleanor would leave to work as a cleaner, returning exhausted at night, but always with a smile for her children. She had been a domestic helper in wealthy families' homes. Paul remembered some of the stories she told, how she was treated, the looks of superiority, the subtle and not-so-subtle humiliations. But Mrs. Eleanor never allowed that to break her. She taught her children that a person's worth was not in the money they had, but in their character. That dignity could not be bought, it was something one carried within. Paul had absorbed these lessons, or at least he thought he had. He worked from his teens, studied at night, graduated in hotel management. His first job was as a receptionist in a modest hotel. There he saw everything. He saw how guests mistreated staff. He saw discrimination, prejudice, arrogance. And he swore to himself that if he ever had his own business, things would be different. But would they really? The question hammered in his mind as he drove through the congested streets. He had grown so much so fast, from one small hotel to 2, then 5, then 10, each acquisition, each renovation, each opening. He was always rushing, always focused on the numbers, on expansion, on profit. When did he stop looking at people? When did the dream of doing things differently turn into just another business? Upon arriving at the Royal Grand, Paul parked in the reserved executive spot and entered through the side door. His eyes immediately searched for his mother, and there she was, sitting on a bench on the sidewalk, small and fragile, next to a modest suitcase, her navy blue dress, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red from crying. Paul's heart broke. This was the woman who had raised him, who had given up everything so he could have an education, who always believed in him when no one else did. And there she was, humiliated, waiting on the street. "Mum." He approached quickly, kneeling in front of her. Mrs. Eleanor looked up. "Paul, my son." Her voice was tired. "You didn't have to come. I'm already going home." Paul felt tears threaten. "No, Mum. You are not going home. You are going into this hotel with me. You are going to check into the best suite we have, and you are going to stay there with all the comfort and respect you deserve. And then I'm going to find out what happened here, and I'm going to settle accounts." Mrs. Eleanor touched her son's face tenderly. "Paul, I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to ruin Matthew's wedding." "You are not causing any trouble, Mum." He held her hand. "The problem was caused by this hotel, and I'm going to fix it. Promise me you'll stay here with me." She nodded, and Paul helped her up. He picked up her suitcase and, with his arm around her shoulders, entered the hotel with her, The doorman, the same one who had seen Mrs. Eleanor expelled earlier, widened his eyes upon seeing the owner of the chain enter with her. "Good afternoon, Mr. Green," he stammered. Paul didn't even respond. He went straight to the reception. Richard, the receptionist who had attended Mrs. Eleanor, paled when he saw him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Green." There was a tremor in his voice. Paul placed the suitcase on the floor and looked directly into the young man's eyes. His voice was low but loaded with an authority that made the receptionist swallow hard. "I want you to explain to me in detail what happened here a few hours ago, and I want the truth." Richard looked around, seeking help. At that moment, Victoria, the manager, appeared. "Mr. Green." What a surprise. She tried to smile, but the smile died on her lips when she saw Mrs. Eleanor. "Can I help you with anything?" Paul turned to her. "Yes, you can, Victoria. You can explain to me why this lady, who is my mother, was expelled from this hotel today. You can explain to me why she was accused of presenting false documents. You can explain to me why you treated a guest, a 78-year-old woman, with such disrespect." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria turned white. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. The other people in the lobby stopped to watch the scene. Paul continued, his voice now louder. "I want to know the protocols you follow for verifying reservations. I want to know if it's standard to treat people like this. I want to know if, when someone arrives here in simple clothes, you automatically assume they are a swindler." "Mr. Green, Victoria tried to speak, but Paul interrupted her. "I'm not finished." He took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. "You humiliated my mother. You made her cry. You threw her out as if she were a criminal. And you know what that makes me think? It makes me think how many other people have been treated like this here. How many other elderly people, how many other people of humble origin, how many other people of color or from disadvantaged regions were discriminated against in this hotel." "Mr. Green, we were just following protocol." Victoria tried to defend herself, her voice trembling. "Protocol?" Paul almost shouted. "Protocol for humiliating people? Protocol for discrimination? Is this the protocol I approved when I bought this hotel?" He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "Do you know what my mother's first job was when she arrived in London? Domestic helper. Do you know how many times she was humiliated, treated as inferior, just for being poor, for being from the countryside? And do you know why I built this company? To do things differently, to create places where all people were treated with respect and dignity." He looked around the lobby. The guests were all attentive. The staff paralyzed. "But you failed. I failed, because I allowed this culture of exclusion and prejudice to take root in my hotels without even realizing it. I was so busy with the numbers, with expansion, that I forgot the most important thing: people." Paul turned to Richard. "You're fired. I don't want you working here another minute." The young man tried to protest. "Mr. Green, I was just doing my job." "No." Paul was firm. "Your job is to treat all guests with respect. Your job is to verify reservations, not to judge people by their appearance. Get your things and leave." Richard left the reception, head down. Paul looked at Victoria. "And you too, you're fired." Victoria gasped. "Mr. Green, this is unfair. I've been with the company for 5 years. I have targets to meet, protocols to follow." "And do those protocols include discrimination?" Paul asked. "Do they include expelling elderly people? Do they include judging guests by the clothes they wear?" He shook his head. "No. You can go too. I'll pay your severance. But I don't want you here." Victoria tried to argue more, but Paul raised his hand. "It's over, Victoria. It's decided." She picked up her bag and left, her high heels echoing on the marble. Paul then turned to the other employees who were watching the scene. "Did anyone else here participate in this humiliation? Does anyone else want to say something?" A young receptionist, who was at another counter, stepped forward. "Mr. Green, I saw what happened. I didn't agree, but I didn't have the courage to intervene. I'm sorry." Paul looked at him. "What's your name?" "Charles, sir. Charles Albert." "Charles, you will take over the temporary management of this hotel until I find someone suitable for the permanent position. Do," You have the courage to do things differently." The young man, who couldn't have been more than 25, widened his eyes. "Me, sir? But I'm just a receptionist. I've been here for 2 years. There are people with much more experience." "Experience in humiliating people?" Paul asked. "No, Charles. You have shown something more important than experience, character, and that's what I need here. Do you accept?" Charles swallowed hard and nodded. "I accept, sir. I'll do my best." "Excellent." Paul turned his attention back to his mother, who had remained quiet the whole time, observing. "Now, Mum, let's get you checked in to the presidential suite, with everything you're entitled to." "Paul, my son," Mrs. Eleanor said softly, "you don't need to do all this. Any room is fine." "No, Mum." Paul was firm. "You deserve the best, and you will have the best." Charles, now in his role as temporary manager, personally handled the check-in. His hands trembled as he typed on the computer. "There, Mrs. Eleanor. Everything is set. The presidential suite on the 20th floor, with a view of Hyde Park." He took the key card and handed it to her with a sincere smile. "Welcome." Mrs. Eleanor thanked him kindly. Paul called one of the porters to take her suitcase. "Escort the lady to her suite and make sure she has everything she needs." After his mother went up, Paul asked Charles to gather all the hotel staff. Half an hour later, about 40 people were in the event hall. There were receptionists, chambermaids, waiters, security guards, kitchen staff, maintenance personnel. Paul looked at all those faces. Many were young, some older. There were people from all backgrounds, colors, regions of the country. "I want to tell you what happened here today," he began. "And I want this to serve as a lesson, not just for this hotel, but for all establishments in our chain." He recounted Mrs. Eleanor's story, from her arrival to her expulsion. He saw embarrassment on the faces of some, indignation on others. "This lady is my mother, the woman who taught me everything about respect, dignity, and hard work. And she was humiliated here." Paul paused, letting the words sink in. "But the problem isn't just what happened to her. The problem is bigger. It's systemic. How many of you have witnessed situations of discrimination in this hotel? How many have seen guests being treated differently because of their appearance, their color, their origin?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Then a chambermaid raised her hand. She was a woman in her 50s, from a northern region by her accent. "Mr. Green, I've worked here for 3 years. I've seen a lot. People being mistreated because they're poor, people being ignored because they're black. And we, the staff, also suffer. Some supervisors treat us like we're nothing." Paul felt the weight of those words. "How much do you earn?" Rosemary replied. "Minimum wage, sir. And from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Without a proper lunch break, we eat kitchen leftovers." Paul closed his eyes for a moment. How had he let things get to this point? "This will change," he said firmly. "Starting today, all of you will receive a 30% raise. You will be entitled to a full meal in the staff cafeteria, which will be renovated. And any supervisor or employee who treats you with disrespect will answer directly to me." The women were in shock. One of them began to cry. "Mr. Green, are you serious?" "Completely serious." Paul smiled. "You are essential to this hotel. Without you, nothing works. You deserve to be treated with dignity and have fair wages." After talking with them for a few more minutes, Paul went to the kitchen. There, he found the team preparing the wedding menu. The chef, a Frenchman named Peter, commanded everything with an iron fist. Paul observed the dynamic for a few minutes. Peter shouted orders, treated the assistants harshly, made derogatory comments. "Peter, a word," Paul called him. The chef turned, surprised. "Monsieur Green, bonjour, everything is perfect for the wedding. The menu will be magnifique." "I'm sure it will. But I need to talk about something else. Do you think shouting at your team is the best form of leadership?" Peter frowned. "This is how we work in a professional kitchen, monsieur. Precision, discipline, authority. I understand, but authority doesn't have to come with disrespect. From now on, I want you to treat your team with more kindness. You can be firm, you can demand excellence, but with respect." The French chef didn't like that at all. "With all due respect, Monsieur Green, you don't understand kitchens. I know how to do my job. And I know how..." I want my employees to be treated. Paul was clear. If you can't adapt your style, we'll have to find another chef. The choice is yours. Peter turned red, but said no more. Paul knew there would be resistance. Change was never easy, especially when it challenged established power structures, but he was determined. At 10 in the morning, Martha arrived at the hotel with Matthew. The groom was nervous, as was natural, but also visibly relieved to see his grandmother well. Gran. He hugged her tightly when she came down to the lobby. I heard what happened yesterday. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Eleanor caressed her grandson's face. Don't worry, my dear, it's all right now. Today is your special day. Let's celebrate your love, your happiness. Matthew, who was a human rights lawyer, had a different perspective on the matter. Gran, what happened to you can't just be left like this. This is discrimination. It's a crime. You have the right to sue the hotel. Paul, who was nearby, approached. Matthew, I know you're right, but your grandmother doesn't want to do that, and I'm making profound changes here, not just firing those responsible, but transforming the entire culture. I have the hotel. Matthew looked at his uncle with skepticism. Uncle Paul, with all due respect, firing two people doesn't solve a structural problem. Discrimination doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the result of a culture, of institutional practices. I know that, Matthew, and that's why I'm going to do much more. Paul then spoke about the changes he had already begun, the salary increases, the new protocols, the training he would implement. Martha, who was a sociologist specializing in racial issues, joined the conversation. Paul, this is a good start, but you need to go deeper. You need to look at who you hire, who you promote, what the composition of your leadership team is like. Discrimination isn't just about how people are treated, but about who has decision-making power. Paul knew his sister was right. Would you help me with this? Be a consultant for the process? Martha smiled. Of course, in fact, I was already thinking of doing that even if you didn't ask. While the family talked, Matthew's fiancée arrived with her family. Amelia was a young black psychologist from a humble background. She and Matthew met at university, where both were scholarship students. It was a beautiful love built on shared values of justice and equality. When she heard what had happened to Mrs. Eleanor, Amelia was outraged. Mrs. Eleanor, she hugged her future grandmother-in-law warmly. Are you all right? When Matthew told me, I couldn't believe it. I'm fine, my dear. Mrs. Eleanor smiled. And very happy to see you two getting married. That's what matters today. But Amelia, like Matthew, couldn't simply let the matter go. You know, Mrs. Eleanor, what happened to you happens every day to millions of people in the UK. We call it structural racism, class discrimination. And most of the time the victims have no voice, no one to defend them. Mrs. Eleanor nodded. I know, dear, I've lived it my whole life. But do you know what I learned? That anger and revolt don't change things. What changes is action, education, persistence. It's true, Amelia agreed, but we also need visibility. People need to know this happens. She looked at Paul. Mr. Green, would you mind if I shared this story on my social media? Obviously without exposing Mrs. Eleanor if she doesn't want to, but I think it's important for people to know. Paul hesitated. He was worried about the repercussions, the impact on the company's image, but then he looked at his mother, who nodded gently. You can share it, Amelia. If my story can help other people, then it's worth it. And so, that Sunday morning, as the final wedding preparations were completed, Amelia published an emotional post on her social media. She told the story of a 78-year-old woman, a lifelong worker, who was humiliated and expelled from a luxury hotel. She didn't mention the names of the hotel or the family, but the message was clear. Discrimination existed, it was real, and it needed to be fought. The post quickly went viral. In a few hours it had thousands of shares. People began to comment, to tell their own stories of discrimination. Some defended the hotel, saying protocols were necessary. Others attacked, saying such treatment was unacceptable. The national debate had begun. Paul followed everything on his phone, with a mixture of apprehension and determination. His press office called, in a panic. Mr. Green, this is getting out of control. We need to issue an official statement, control the damage. But Paul surprised everyone. We are not controlling any damage. We are taking responsibility. Prepare a statement saying that Green Hospitality recognizes that discrimination occurred in one of its units, that those responsible have been removed, and that we are implementing profound changes in all our hotels. I want it to be transparent, honest, without trying to minimize what happened. The press officer was silent for a moment. Mr. Green, with all due respect, this could seriously affect our business. Investors might withdraw. Clients might cancel reservations. Then let them cancel. Paul was firm. I don't want clients who agree with discrimination, and investors who only care about profit without ethical consideration. No longer interest me either. We're going to do this the right way. At 3 in the afternoon, the Royal Grand's ballroom was transformed. Flowers everywhere, elegant but not exaggerated arrangements, chairs decorated with white fabric and golden details. The guests began to arrive, about 150 people, including family and friends. The atmosphere was joyful, but there was also an underlying tension. Many had already seen Amelia's viral post and knew the story. Mrs. Eleanor looked beautiful in her new dress, which Martha had bought for her. A long champagne-colored gown, elegant and appropriate. Her white hair was styled in a low bun, and she wore a discreet pearl necklace. But what shone most brightly in her was not the clothes or the jewelry. It was her dignity, that same dignity that no humiliation had managed to take away. The ceremony was emotional. Matthew cried when he saw Amelia entering, radiant in her simple but beautiful wedding dress. The vows they exchanged were sincere, speaking of love, respect, partnership, and the fight for a fairer world. When the Justice of the Peace declared them husband and wife, everyone applauded and was moved. But it was at the reception during dinner that the most impactful moment occurred. Matthew asked for the floor. The guests fell silent, and he walked to the center of the hall with a microphone. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this very special day," he began. "Amelia and I are very happy, but it would be dishonest of me to celebrate this moment without talking about something that happened yesterday, right here in this hotel." He then told Mrs. Eleanor's story, in detail, with emotion, sparing no one. He spoke about the humiliation, about the discrimination, about what that represented in a country like the UK, where millions of people suffered daily from prejudice. "My grandmother," he looked at Mrs. Eleanor with affection, "is the most dignified woman I know. She worked her entire life, raised 3 children practically alone, always with honesty and love. But she was treated like trash, as if she didn't deserve to be here, and that is not acceptable." The people in the hall were in absolute silence. Some cried. Matthew continued. "My Uncle Paul, who owns this hotel chain, took immediate action. He fired those responsible, promised changes. And I believe in his sincerity, but I want everyone here to know that this case is not isolated. It is a symptom of a larger structural problem that exists throughout the country." He paused. "And that's why Amelia and I have decided that, instead of wedding gifts, we want people to donate to organizations that fight discrimination and promote equality. We want our wedding to be a landmark, not just for us, but for the fight for justice." The applause was long and emotional. Mrs. Eleanor was crying, but they were tears of pride. Paul also had tears in his eyes. And when Matthew invited his grandmother to dance the first waltz with him, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As they danced, Matthew murmured in his grandmother's ear, "Gran, you are my inspiration. Everything I am, everything I believe, I learned from you." Mrs. Eleanor smiled through her tears. "And you are my pride, my grandson. You and Amelia will make the world a better place, I'm sure of it." The party continued late into the night, but something had changed. Not just in the hotel, not just in the family, but in everyone present. Matthew and Amelia's wedding became much more than a celebration of love. It became a manifesto, a moment of reflection, a collective commitment to change. And as the night wore on and people danced and celebrated, Paul watched everything from a corner of the hall. Beside him, Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, brother." He nodded. There's still a lot to do. This is just the beginning. I know. But you started, and that's already a lot. Paul looked at his mother, who was chatting animatedly with Amelia and some guests. Mrs. Eleanor was radiant, surrounded by love and respect, and Paul understood that that was true success. Not the hotels, not the profits, not the empire he had built. True success was seeing his mother happy, respected, valued. It was knowing that he was doing the right thing, even if it was difficult, even if it brought consequences. The transformation of the Royal Grand was just beginning, and Mrs. Eleanor's story, which should have been just another case of silent discrimination, was becoming a movement for dignity, for justice, for equality, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months had passed since that Saturday that changed everything. Autumn had arrived in London, bringing fresher mornings and clear sky afternoons. The Royal Grand was different, transformed from the inside out. The change was not just physical, although renovations were underway in the staff cafeteria and rest areas. The true transformation was invisible to the eye but palpable in the air. Charles, the young man who had been promoted to manager on that dramatic afternoon, had proven to be the right choice. At just 25, he brought new energy, a fresh vision. He didn't have the vices of experienced managers. He didn't carry the discriminatory practices that had taken root. Over the years, every morning he made a point of greeting each employee by name. He knew their stories, their families, their dreams. Rosemary, the chambermaid who first dared to speak about the problems, was now the supervisor of the cleaning team. With the salary increase, she had managed to enroll her youngest daughter in a technical course. In the weekly meetings Paul had instituted, she shared ideas on how to improve working conditions, and her suggestions were taken seriously. The staff cafeteria, once a cramped and poorly lit space where they ate leftovers, was now a spacious and welcoming area. It had comfortable tables, an equipped kitchen, and the same menu served to guests. On the first day after the renovation, many employees cried. They had never been treated with such consideration. But not everything had been easy. There was resistance, especially from long-time employees who were accustomed to the previous system. 2 supervisors resigned, unable to adapt to the new equality policies. Some guests complained, saying that the hotel was losing its standard, its refinement. Paul responded to each complaint with politeness but firmness. The Royal Grand standard now included respect and dignity for all, and anyone who disagreed was free to choose another establishment. The repercussions of the case extended beyond social media. Major newspapers published articles about Mrs. Eleanor's story and the transformation of the Royal Grand. Business magazines analyzed Paul's changes as a case study on corporate social responsibility. Television programs invited Mrs. Eleanor for interviews, but she always kindly refused. She didn't seek fame or recognition. Her satisfaction was in seeing the changes happening. Martha, true to her word, became an official consultant for green hospitality. She worked with Paul to implement diversity and inclusion programs in all 23 hotels in the chain. It was not a quick or simple process. Each hotel had its peculiarities, its specific challenges, but Paul's determination was unshakable. He personally visited each unit, talked with employees, listened to complaints and suggestions, and fired managers who resisted the changes. The investors, as the press office had predicted, became nervous. There was a tense board meeting where they questioned Paul's decisions. A particularly vocal investor argued that the company was losing money with the renovations, salary increases and training, that the market did not reward this type of stance. Paul listened in silence. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up and looked directly into the eyes of everyone present. Do you know how I started in this business? Working as a receptionist in a second-rate hotel, earning minimum wage, being treated as inferior by guests. I built this company with the promise that it would be different, that people would be treated with dignity. I lost that promise along the way, but now I've regained it. And if you can't understand that, if you think profit is more important than humanity, then I suggest you sell your shares, because I will not change direction. The silence in the room was absolute. 2 investors effectively sold their stakes. But surprisingly, 3 new investors appeared, interested precisely in the company's new philosophy. They were investment funds focused on social responsibility, who saw green hospitality as a model of ethical and sustainable business. And the numbers, against all pessimistic predictions, began to improve. The occupancy rate of the Royal Grand rose from 82 to 93%. Employee turnover dropped drastically, saving recruitment and training costs. Online reviews improved significantly, with guests praising not only the facilities, but especially the warm and genuine service. One day, 6 weeks after Matthew's wedding, Paul received an email that left him speechless. It was from the International Hotel Association, inviting him to present the Royal Grand's transformation model at their annual Congress, which would be held in Lisbon. The theme of the Congress was Inclusive Hospitality for the 21st Century, and they wanted Paul as the keynote speaker. He showed the email to Martha, incredulous. "They're inviting me to talk about inclusion, me who allowed my own mother to be humiliated." "Exactly," Martha smiled. "You are proof that it is possible to change, that it is possible to recognize mistakes and correct them. That is the most powerful story you can tell." Paul accepted the invitation, and when the day of the lecture arrived in a room full of hotel entrepreneurs from all over the world, he hid nothing. He began the presentation with his mother's story. He showed photos of Mrs. Eleanor, told about the humiliation she suffered, and took complete responsibility for what happened. Many expected a technical lecture full of data and graphs. Instead, they received a lesson in humanity. "I built an empire," Paul told the silent audience, "but I almost lost my soul in the process. I was so focused on growth and profit that I forgot what my mother always taught me, that a person's worth is not in their bank account, but in their character. The day she was expelled from my hotel was the day I woke up, and since then, everything has changed." He presented the numbers, yes. He showed how turnover had decreased, how guest satisfaction had increased, how the company was more profitable than ever. But he emphasized that these metrics were consequences, not objectives. The objective was simple: to treat everyone with dignity. The lecture ended with a 5-minute standing ovation. Dozens of entrepreneurs approached afterward, wanting to know more, wanting to implement similar changes in their own establishments. Paul shared everything, generously, because the movement was not about him or his hotel. It was about transforming an entire industry. While Paul was in Lisbon, Mrs. Eleanor received an unexpected visit at her home in Brixton. It was a journalist and writer named Beatrice Foster, known for her books about the stories of invisible women, those who worked hard all their lives but rarely received recognition. "Mrs. Eleanor," Beatrice explained as they drank coffee in the simple but cozy kitchen, "I'm writing a book about women like you, women who supported families, who faced discrimination, who persevered despite everything. I would love to include your story." Mrs. Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know if my story is that special, dear. I just did what I had to do. I raised my children, worked honestly." "That's exactly what makes your story special," Beatrice smiled. "You represent millions of British women. And what happened to you at the hotel, the way your son reacted, the transformation that generated, all of that is important. People need to know." After much thought, Mrs. Eleanor agreed. She spent several afternoons telling her story to Beatrice. She spoke about her childhood in the countryside of Yorkshire, about moving to London when she was young, about her marriage, her children, her work as a domestic helper. She spoke of the daily humiliations, the looks of contempt, the times she was treated as inferior. But she also spoke of the joys, the small victories, the moments of dignity maintained even in the most difficult situations. The book, titled Invisible Women, was launched 8 months after that fateful Saturday. Mrs. Eleanor's story was one of the central chapters. The launch was held at the Royal Grand itself, in an event that brought together authorities, activists, journalists, and ordinary people. Mrs. Eleanor, for the first time, agreed to speak publicly. Dressed simply but elegantly, she went on stage with a certain shyness. When she began to speak, however, her voice was firm. "I spent 78 years of my life working, raising my children, trying to be a good person, and during many of those years I was treated as invisible. as if my work had no value, as if I didn't matter. What happened here in this hotel was nothing new to me. It was just one more time, but this time it was different, because my son saw, because he decided to change, and because many people united to say that this is not right. She paused, her eyes shining. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I want you to understand that there are millions of people like me who work hard every day and deserve respect, who clean houses, who care for children, who cook food, who keep this country running. And these people are not invisible. They are fundamental, they are dignified. The applause was emotional and long. Matthew and Amelia, who were in the front row, openly cried. Paul, who had returned from Lisbon especially for the event, couldn't hold back his tears. Martha was radiant, proud of her mother and brother. After the event, a young woman approached Mrs. Eleanor. She was a young black woman, about 20 years old, dressed in a chambermaid's uniform. Mrs. Eleanor, she said with a choked voice, I work here at the hotel. I came from County Durham 3 years ago, seeking a better life. And I can say that the changes that happened here changed my life, too. Before I was treated like nothing. Now I am treated with respect. I have a decent salary. I can study at night because my schedule was adjusted. All thanks to you. Mrs. Eleanor hugged the young woman. It wasn't because of me, dear. It was because of all of us who decided we deserve better. 1 year after that Saturday, the Royal Grand was completely transformed, not just in policies and practices, but in its essence. It had become a national benchmark in inclusive hospitality. It received several awards and certifications, but the most significant recognition came from an employee satisfaction survey. 97% said they felt respected and valued at work. It was the highest index in the entire UK hotel chain. Paul implemented the same changes in all green hospitality hotels. Some took longer than others, some faced more resistance. But gradually the entire chain was transformed. The company launched a scholarship program for employees' children. It created a clear career path where chambermaids could become supervisors, supervisors could become managers. It implemented quotas for hiring black people and those from disadvantaged backgrounds into leadership positions. The financial results continued to surprise. Green Hospitality became the fastest-growing hotel chain in the UK. But Paul knew that true success was not in the numbers. It was in the letters he received from employees thanking him for the opportunities. It was in his mother's bright eyes whenever she visited the hotels and saw the changes. It was in the feeling of doing the right thing. Mrs. Eleanor, at 79, became an admired public figure. She received invitations to speak at universities, companies, social events. Some she accepted, others she refused. Her priority remained her family, her friends from Brixton, her simple life. But she understood that her story had power, that it could inspire change, give voice to the invisible, show that dignity is non-negotiable. On an autumn afternoon, exactly 1 year after that Saturday that changed everything, the family gathered again at the Royal Grand, not for a wedding this time, but for a celebration. The room where Paul had held that first dramatic meeting with the employees, where he had fired the receptionist and the manager, where he had promised changes, was now decorated for a party. Everyone was there. Mrs. Eleanor, naturally, Paul and Martha, Matthew and Amelia, who were now expecting their first child, Charles, who continued as manager and was considered one of the best in the industry, Rosemary and the entire cleaning team, Edward, the security guard who chose to question unjust orders and was now a security supervisor, and dozens of other employees who had lived through the transformation. Paul asked for the floor. A year ago, something terrible happened in this place. My mother was humiliated, discriminated against, expelled. I was blind, focused only on growth and profit. But that day woke me up. It made me remember who I was, where I came from, what truly matters. He looked around, at all those faces. And thanks to you, thanks to every person here who had the courage to speak up, to change, to believe that it was possible to be different, we transformed this place. We transformed this company. And I hope we are contributing to transforming our country. Mrs. Eleanor then stood up. Her voice, despite her age, was clear and strong. My son asked me to say a few words, and I want to say something very simple. For most of my life, I was invisible. People passed me by without truly seeing me. But now I understand that I was never invisible. I was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to look, and what happened here was that many people learned to look, to see not just me, but everyone who works, who struggles, who builds this country every day. She smiled, and in that smile there was wisdom, compassion, and hope. True transformation is not in pretty hotels, better salaries, or written policies. It is here, she pointed to her heart. It is in recognizing the dignity of every human being, in treating others with respect, not because they are rich or poor, white or black from the north or the south, but simply because they are human. And that applies everywhere, not just hotels. It applies to homes, to businesses, to schools, to streets. It applies to the entire UK. The applause was long and emotional. When the party ended and everyone had left, Paul and Mrs. Eleanor remained alone in the hall. He helped her sit in one of the armchairs and sat beside her. "Mum," he held her hand, "thank you for everything, for raising us with dignity, for teaching me true values even when I forgot them, for being strong when you were humiliated here. If it weren't for you, none of this would have happened." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed her son's hand. "Paul, you were always a good boy. You just got a little lost along the way. But you found your way back, and that's what matters. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to recognize the mistake and change." They stayed there for a few more minutes, in comfortable silence, as the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the hall with a golden light. And at that moment, Paul fully understood. The empire he had built, the hotels, the money, the international recognition, all of it was secondary. What truly mattered was there, in that wrinkled hand holding his, in that unconditional love, in that life lesson he would carry forever. Mrs. Eleanor's story was not just about an elderly woman who was humiliated and then vindicated. It was about much more. It was about the UK that exists beyond appearances, beyond the luxury of five-star hotels. It was about the millions of invisible workers who sustain this country. It was about recognizing that dignity is not a privilege of a few, but a right of all. It was about personal, institutional, and social transformation. And while the Royal Grand continued to operate, welcoming guests from all over the world, offering luxury and comfort, it now did so with something no marble or chandelier could buy: humanity. Every employee who arrived for work was greeted by name. Every guest, regardless of their appearance or origin, was treated with respect. Every decision was made, thinking not only of profit, but of the impact on people. The transformation initiated on that Saturday of humiliation continued, day after day, person after person, hotel after hotel. And Mrs. Eleanor, the woman who for so long was invisible, was now a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of hope, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the light always finds a way to shine.